I think what I'm liking most about doing this series is that I really believe anyone, anywhere can write. I believe that if you can speak, you can write. So it doesn't matter how old you are, your gender, your ethnicity, where in the world you are, what language you speak, how well connected to the industry you are. What matters is how well what you write lands with your intended reader. And that's something I can help you with. Screenwriting friends, and welcome to another episode of The Feedback Loop. This is the free weekly deep dive screenwriting feedback series where we look at the first 3 pages of a different writer's script each week, and I review them word by word, page by page. I take you through them and show you what they look like from the producer's perspective, with the idea being that if you keep coming back week after week after week, you'll start to see the kinds of things that work, the kinds of things that don't, and for those things that don't, we do have the writer on the call, so we can ask them about what their intentions are, what they're trying to get at with that, and maybe introduce some tools and techniques and suggestions for how to make their work land a little bit more effectively. My name is Jeff Ballo, and for nearly 20 years, I was searching for screenplays to produce. You've already seen my spiel by now if you've watched the previous episodes of this session. But just know that my whole goal and my whole purpose was never actually to try to teach screenwriting to people. My goal when I went down this path was really to develop projects that people like me, independent producers that don't necessarily have the money to throw at script development, people like me could actually say yes to, because what I was finding was that literally 99% of all screenplays that were submitted to my production company were not actually viable. They were not something that not just me, but any producer could ever actually say yes to. And my hope is that through watching this series, you'll start to see the kinds of things that are getting in your way if you've been writing for a while and maybe you've been struggling with it, or if you're new to the game, the kinds of things that are going to get in your way when it comes time to get out there and start submitting. And by the way, for the record, you should only submit your project once you think it's ready for serious consideration, because producers and production companies can't review just everything that comes in. We have to say no to the vast majority of projects because there's simply not enough time to work on and develop and focus energy on everything, particularly those things that we can't actually ever work with. So if you're going to submit something, make sure you know who you're targeting, make sure that your project is perfect for them, make sure that it is aligned with them, and make sure that you know that it's going to land with them the way you intend for it to land with them, in a way they're going to love and be able to say yes to. So, without further ado, today's pages come to us from a writer based out of Switzerland by the name of Philip Barnes. Philip's script is called The Button Man, and he's calling it a crime drama. Now, for this session, Philip was on the call live in Switzerland, which it was after midnight Switzerland time, so I can't keep the call shorter just to try to get him to sleep earlier, but hopefully it's worth staying up late for. Now, there was a little bit of a technical difficulty at the time of recording this session, so we actually missed the first welcome to Philip when he gets on the call, so my apologies to Philip for that. When we're finished today talking with Philip about his pages, the first 3 pages of the familiar script we're going to look at today are the first 3 pages from the screenplay for MEMENTO. This is the Christopher Nolan and Jonathan Nolan screenplay for the movie starring Guy Pearce, which is a story told in reverse. Now, this idea, this sort of gimmicky concept of telling a story in reverse had not been done before, and it was an extremely innovative idea and concept, and I think the initial pages for it really help you understand how to set up something a little bit different, a little bit complex. So I hope you're going to enjoy those pages. Always remember, this is a deep dive, so be sure to settle in. Make sure to get yourself something to drink. Make sure to get something to take notes with, because there are going to be lots of interesting interesting insights in this session of the feedback loop, which I hope you will now sit back and enjoy. Here we go. Fade in, exterior street in London, day, dusk. 1974, autumn. People head home from work, enjoying the late, low sun. Shopkeepers pull down shutters and lock doors as they close for the day. Frank Baxter, mid-30s, solid build, world-weary look on his face, strides purposefully up the road. He wears a smart cardigan and carries a sports bag. He enters a doorway to flats. Stairwell. On the top floor, he reaches a padlocked door. From a pocket, he brings out lock picks and deftly uses them on the lock. He wipes the lock with a handkerchief, opens the door, and walks through to a flat roof. Frank peers down over a low wall to the street below, then sits back against the wall. He produces a packet of cigarettes and lights up. From his bag, he brings out a quarter bottle of whiskey with a penguin paperback. He reads and waits. Later, it's quiet and dark, too dark to read. Frank's face is faintly illuminated as he pulls on another cigarette. A car comes down the street. ABBA's Waterloo drifts from its rolled down windows. Frank looks over and watches the car stop across the road. The driver kills the engine, exits the car, and enters a doorway. From the sports bag, Frank pulls out the body and stock of a rifle and a silencer. Coolly, he assembles the weapon and loads it with a single bullet, like he's done this many times before. A light comes on in a room across the street, one floor below Frank's vantage point. Frank rests his arm on the wall and peers down the rifle's sight. The car driver approaches the window and reaches up to close the curtain. A neat red hole appears in the man's forehead. He falls backwards and lies motionless on the floor. Frank puts the rifle down and calmly takes a swig from his bottle. Interior living room, flat, day, dusk. Present day, autumn. Frank, now in his late 70s, drains a dirty glass of whiskey. He has bloodshot eyes, thin white hair, and an unkempt beard. The tatty, faded cardigan he wears has lost all its buttons. Everything in Frank's flat is old, dirty, and gray. A tall bookcase of dusty paperbacks holds peeling wallpaper in place. On a TV that's lost its ability to display green, he's watching a travel show that doesn't seem bothered by the purple-toned screen. Frank sits like he hasn't moved in years. It's as if he's waiting for something. The program goes to an ad break, a happy family at an airport ready for a fun-filled holiday. Frank gets up and trudges to his kitchen, coughing hard. Filthy trousers hang loose on his thin frame. Kitchen. Dim light comes from a grilled window. Frank opens a cupboard and peers in. Exterior Frank's council estate. Day. Dusk. Blocks of flats form a square. Frank strolls steadily through the open space between the buildings. He passes a group of kids bullying another kid, youths passing around a joint, men drinking from cans. Frank pays them no attention. Interior mini market, day, dusk. The Asian shopkeeper greets Frank with a nod of recognition. Into a basket, Frank drops cup of soups, some marked down rolls, and a tin of beans. Interior living room, Frank's flat, day. Frank's dozing in his armchair. The doorbell rings. Frank doesn't stir. It rings again. Someone calls Frank's name through the letterbox. Frank's eyes flicker open. A moment later, John McVeigh, late 40s, business suit covering a spreading waistline, enters the living room, followed by Frank. McVeigh, so how you keeping? Frank coughs in reply. McVeigh looks around the room. McVeigh continued, Christ, Frank, this is no way to live, is it? Indicates window. Do you mind? McVeigh lets some fresh air in. Frank sits in his chair and lights a cigarette. McVeigh peers outside. Looks like it's going to piss down. Met Jerry the other day. His boy's inside. Threw acid at a girl or something. Oh, and Murdo was asking for you. Frank, what do you want, John? His voice is creaky from lack of use. McVeigh turns a chair at the small dinner table and sits facing Frank. Well, it's also about what you want. How about not living like this for starters? I've got a job for you. Frank, a job? McVeigh, yeah, a hit. Frank looks more than a little dubious. McVeigh continued, you can still pull a trigger, can't you? Right, so these are the pages that we're going to discuss in today's session. Now, the first thing that I want to say about this is that overall this is relatively well written. This is we talk about, I don't know if you've watched the previous episodes of this series, but one of the things that keeps coming up again and again is the idea of image order and the idea of making crisp, clean writing that sort of one image builds upon the next, and paints a very simple, clear picture. And one of the things these pages do really well is they do that. It's a clean, clear writing style with those ideas being presented in a way that we can easily see and grasp and understand. A couple of things that have jumped out at me though is 1974 Autumn should probably be in the Slug Lines. So it's exterior street in London, 1974. And then rather than day and in brackets dusk, I would just say go straight to dusk. Just forget the brackets, just put dusk. So exterior street in London, 1974, dusk. That way, when we get down to here, interior living room, Frank's flat, in brackets, present day, dusk. Right? So the challenge is if someone is skimming over these pages, they might miss that present day in here in the description can get very easily lost and skimmed over. So we think we're still in the 70s at this point, or we think we're not quite sure where we are ultimately, initially. So that little thing aside, then additionally we have these sort of what are generally known as shots, but are sort of mini slug lines in here. Generally speaking, if we go, he enters a doorway to flats, stairwell on the top floor. It's one of the things we can do in screenwriting is we can break up a paragraph over 2 pages to highlight a word. So you might have something like stairwell leads to the whatever, right? So rather than having just that single word, you might want to do something like on the stairwell, on the roof, or in the stairwell, on the roof, or top of the stairwell, or hours later, or something like that, so that you're breaking it up a little bit more, so it doesn't run into it doesn't look like it's just the action description lines. Other than that, we have a couple of other little issues. There's there are a few typos along the way. Where was the one that I was looking at before? I can't find it. There's a couple of little typos in here, but overall, I would say that it's presented well. So if we have a story, if we have a screenplay that in general is well written and in general is presented clearly, then we can start to look a little bit deeper. So what I'm going to want to do today is I want to look a little bit more into the story behind it, what we're trying to get at here, and is this going to be the most effective way to introduce the character and to introduce the story that you're trying to tell with this. What we see in this first, we have basically a page here of we have an initial page here, basically that turns out to be the flashback, which is him as a younger man on a hit. And then we have basically a page here showing sort of how he is now. And then we have a page here where there's a character that comes in and says, hey, do you want to tap into that old life again? But we don't necessarily have anything too compelling at this point. The writing's interesting. It's well written, so it does pull us into the story on a certain level. But because there's nothing sort of grabbing us necessarily, there's maybe a little layer to it that's kind of missing from the story at the moment, and so it's not kind of drawing us into what. It's not really giving us necessarily a reason why we want to know what's happening. We want to keep going. So broadly speaking, we kind of have this story that just sort of meanders into existence. It's very methodically sort of one thing happens, then the next thing happens, the next thing happens. There's not really that grabber that is going to engages. What's unique about this guy? What's unique about this situation? And really, what's the story that's coming up? So, without further ado, I'd like to get on the call, and I'd like to get Philip on here, and we can sort of discuss a little bit of what the intention was. So, so Philip, what I want to put to you is, what is the intention behind it? What's the story that you're trying to tell? So I'd like to know a little bit more about where it's trying to go, what the story is trying to be, so that we can make sure that the story choices that you're making on page 1 are actually going to serve and maybe set up what is going to happen later on in the story.
You're breaking up on my end as well.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. So there's okay. So if I'm understanding correctly, it's going to be the story of this guy who's going to be, so did you say he's going into a retirement home and he's going to be meeting the kinds of people whose lives he affected?
He's to do the job that he's got to do. He's got to try and kill this guy. He's going to take on a false identity and go using his own name, because he's worked all his life as a hitman for a crime organization. So he's got a new name, and he goes in, he's cut, and he gets new suit of clothes, and he looks like the kind of person he should have been had he not led the life.
Okay.
That he did.
Right. Okay.
He's kind of with the people that he should have been with. He's with her. He should have gone on to study university and get married and have children, and that's basically not happened for him.
So it's almost like he's seeing the alternate life that would have happened had it not been for this incident when he was 14.
Yes.
Okay. So that's an interesting.
Yes.
It's certainly an interesting idea. Okay, so I'm trying to, I guess my question, and it's not even so much a suggestion or a advice. It's more, is this going to be the way that most connects us to that deeper theme, or connects us to that deeper story, right? So then, and the reason I'm asking, the reason I'm sort of throwing this out there is when the reader's reading your script, right, at the beginning of the story, we're looking for cues and clues as to what the story is going to be about. Why are we here? Why are we watching this? Why do we care? And it doesn't mean you have to immediately start with some grand thing, but my initial question is, so my initial question is, why not start with the incident at age 14, I guess, but yeah, why not?
That's a good question. I wanted that to come. Okay, so what I've read in different books is that entity is his ghost, and that the ghost should maybe not be revealed right at the start, and that maybe you should be made apparent that something that's happened that's caused him to be the way he is, but that it's not revealed in the first 3 pages.
Okay, so I don't disagree with that general advice, and the idea of having a ghost, something that happened in your past that haunts you and kind of determines what kind of character you are and who you are, and what things mean to you in the world. The idea of that is solid. And you don't necessarily have to show that at the very beginning, but at the very beginning, we're going to need something that pulls us into, if not that, then certainly the ramifications of that, right? We're going to probably want to see the effect of that. And if he's just a hitman, kind of just doing a hit, that's a pretty standard sort of hit, right? It doesn't, there's nothing distinctive about that hit that makes us think, oh, this guy's a little screwed up in some way, right? Because a hitman is such a trope of film, right? Like it's the hitman is. I don't know how many people have actually met hitmen in real life, but I don't meet them very often. I've never known one in the past that I'm aware of. But but yet they're sort of all over film, right? So in the context of
Yeah.
film, they're not a hitman is not necessarily a special thing in terms of we don't see a hitman and go, man, that guy must have been screwed up when he was 14, right? Like so as a result, because of just the context of film, we're going to want to make sure that whatever that ghost is going to set up something that makes this character unique or distinctive at the beginning, right? The idea being that if we don't want to start on as ghost, and that's fine that you don't want to, or you want to reveal it later, that's all fine. But we still need something at the beginning that pulls us into the story. And
Yeah.
I would argue that there isn't really anything yet, because it's kind of a standard hit, and then you have a whole page on the second page of just sort of reviewing his where he is today, and there's description there, and it's a good read, it's enjoyable to read, but it doesn't really tell us much from a narrative perspective or a story perspective, right? Like in theory, you could do this whole hit and the whole update on half a page, and then have McVeigh enter at the bottom of page one and say, "Yep, for a new hit," right? Like you could kind of do all that in one page from the perspective of the content that's there, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm suggesting is that maybe there's a missed opportunity here to weave into this. If you want this pacing and you want this this gradual introduction, this character-driven thing, what I'm suggesting is that there's probably a way to weave into this that other layer or something a bit more complex that's going to give us that fascinating sort of like we're going to have a reason to go, I want to find out more about this quirky guy or what have you. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I did have a slight version of the hit which did suggest about what was going on, but I thought it created other problems as well. So I went back to my version.
Fair enough. What sort of problems with?
Okay, well, okay, I'd have to tell you what happened when he was 14. He takes his younger sister to a fun fair and loses her in the crowd. And when he eventually finds out she's been raped and murdered, and so that sets him down his path of his parents. He can't get over the grief. So in the hit, I wanted to have the idea that there's a policeman waiting outside the doorway that Frank goes into, an exchange of glances as they pass each other, almost as if he's kind of working for the police, or that could have been a paedophile, for example, and that the police are passing on information to him. But then it made it sound like he was working for the police, the idea of the story.
Right. So from what you're saying, I can see why that could be problematic, because it's adding that other layer that complicates the hit itself. So I would tend to agree that it's probably going to be cleaner to pull that out. But from what you've said about his past, he's basically driven by vengeance to go down this road of becoming a hitman, and maybe over many years that vengeance has just turned into cold-bloodedness or what have you. Is that kind of where you're going?
Kind of. I think the idea is when he's 14 and he drops out of school and he starts hanging about in places he shouldn't, and he starts getting involved with people he shouldn't. By bit, he's drawn into this world of crime. So it's not necessarily that he wanted to become a killer. It's just that he gradually becomes a different person, and perhaps he becomes he's very callous and he's got no compassion because of what's happened. So he's a good hitman because it's about how he develops compassion.
Okay. I mean, obviously, without knowing the whole story or without knowing more of where you're trying to go, the suggestions or the advice that I'm going to bring up may or may not be relevant to what it is. But so it's not so much about make this choice or make that choice, but it's really I guess what I'm trying to get at is that the start of the story is perfectly fine from that sort of rolling information based start, but there's nothing in it that's grabbing us as other than a well written situation. And so
Okay.
if you imagine a reader is got a stack of scripts on their desk or like 10 scripts to read over one weekend or whatever, and that's usually how it is, then they're going to be sort of looking really quickly for what is this.
Yeah.
And so this is why everyone says, your first page is the most important page, or make sure they know what's going on by page 3 or by page 10 or whatever all these ridiculous bits of advice are. The general idea is that it needs to be something special right off the bat. Now,
Yeah.
what that is or how that manifests is wildly variable. Right now, it's well written, and that's great because that too is rare. But once you get past that, then it's like, okay, this is nice and shiny, but what is it? And that's that's what's sort of missing, that little element. And what you're describing is a really interesting character backstory. So I'm wondering, how can we hint at it, or how can we use that in some way to add that missing layer to this beginning?
Yeah. I guess I was hoping that when you started reading it, you think, okay, this is from the 1970s about a hitman, and then once you get past that, you realize, oh, actually, this is a story about an ex-hitman who's in his 70s. So what's this about? So I was hoping that would be the hook.
Well, and it is a hook on a very simple level. But I'm not suggesting that there's no hook here, or that this isn't interesting enough to keep reading. Because if this was a script that came on my desk anyway, and and this was the kind of story that I was interested in, I would keep reading, just because I want to see where you're going with this. So it's obviously well enough written that you've probably got somewhere that you're going with it. What I'm saying is that there's that added layer that makes a script go from, yeah, this is a good script, to, wow, this is a great script. Like, that difference is what's going to get you across the line, right? I'm not saying anybody can write a good script, but potentially, right? Like, at the end of the day, it's not just about it's like you go watch movies these days, and it's like, you don't walk away going, well, that was well photographed. It's like, yeah, we kind of expect it to be well photographed. So what's beyond that? And to me, it's like, I don't have any problem with what you've written. I just think that there's a layer that we can go deeper with it,
Okay.
But the place to go to pull that from is the rest of the story. So when you're talking about he goes into the old folks home, how far into your story does that happen?
It's fairly fast. So I think, basically for me, it fell neatly into 3 acts: as before the retirement home, at the retirement home, at home. And so acts 1 and 3 are actually fairly short, only about 15 pages, I think.
Okay. So if okay. So what's the takeaway from what's the theme, or the what do you want people to walk away from this feeling or thinking about? Or
the theme that I was going for is prisoners of our past, and changing is difficult. So he is who he is today because of what's happened to him, things, and you are who you are today because of decisions you've made or decisions that were made for you when you were young, etc. And it's very difficult to change from that. So that's everybody, all the main characters in the story reflect that theme. They are who they are today because of who they've been in the
Right.
past.
Is Frank the sort of primary central character? Do you have other characters who you look at different angles of that through?
Yeah, he ends up when he gets to the retirement home. He has to make contact with the going to kill, and he ends up becoming friends with them. And so he's got this added problem that he's now friendly with the guy he's got to kill. But he's, as I say, he's a fairly callous person. He doesn't go in wanting to become friends. He just wants to go in, do this hit, and get his money, etc. But also, the father of the guy he's going to kill is also a prisoner of his past, because as the story goes on, we realize that this guy knows what his son is like. His son is, who's a leader of another criminal gang, is also a paedophile. And his father knows this, and he feels that he's a prisoner of his past because he shouldn't be who he is. He was away traveling a lot around enough for his son, and so there's these things coming into the story.
Okay, so as you're saying all these things, I'm trying to process how the story would start to prepare me for that journey, right? So let's go back to the very beginning. Like you called the genre crime drama. So
Yeah.
when you think of a crime drama, you think of a crime that has occurred, and then the drama surrounding the solving of the crime, or the procedure of investigating the crime, or that kind of thing, right? Is that here as well, or because what you're describing to me is more of like a character piece, right? Like it's more like just a straight character drama rather than a crime drama per se.
Yeah. Okay. I have to be honest with you. I sent the screenplay off to a script reading service, and they called it a crime drama, but that's not what I called it. And I thought, okay, they must know what they're talking about, so I've written a crime drama.
Yeah, unfortunately the challenge we have with a lot of the script reading services out there is they're not. I don't want to go on too much a rant about this, but generally speaking, the script reading services are often, university graduates who are doing low-paid reading jobs and sort of churning out what they've been taught along the way. And it's very rarely are you going to get someone reading and responding to and give you notes on your script sort of from that producer angle. It's usually from a reader and or writer angle, and that's kind of one of my big pet peeves about all this. And there's I don't know of any way to solve that problem, unfortunately, because you're not the reason I'm doing something like this series here is because I don't have time to go read everybody's script and give everybody notes. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to work on any film project. So it is a perpetual challenge. But you kind of got to go into note services and script reading services with that in mind, so that you take everything with a little bit of grain of salt. If your instinct is that this is not a crime drama, and then they come back and they say it's a crime drama, then you might sort of look sideways at the reader rather than take it on board. Fair enough. It is what it is. But the reason it matters in this case is that when you say it's a crime drama, you're putting me in a certain frame of mind to expect a certain kind of story. Yeah. And so when I read the initial hit and I read that, then my brain's going, well, why wouldn't you start with a more dramatic crime, or the way you've told this crime, like show me what the super heightened drama of that is, and then you're going to lead me into a crime drama. So all of these things have an impact upon what the what the feedback's going to be, and on what the way the reader or the producer perceives the project that you're submitting. You know,
Yeah.
it is what it is. That's all right. But I would say generally that you're probably talking about a character drama. But if you're talking about a character drama, then we do want to start by really highlighting the uniqueness or quirkiness or foible, whatever it might be, of the character that we're asked to, you know, embrace through the story. So in that way, I would say that what we have is good. It's there. It's interesting, but there's, like I said, that layer missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I'll work on that.
But I feel like I haven't given you anything specific to work on. But the solution is
No,
going.
I'll think about that. I get the point.
The solution's going to come from where you're going. Think of it like setup payoff, right? So you know what the end of the film is. You know what we're working towards at the end. What's the thing that is most like? What's either the opposite of it, or what's going to set that emotion to make that story happen? Or you can usually find the more intriguing thing through that ghost part, that flaw in the past, or through the climax of your story, or through some aspect of a relationship throughout, to where I don't think it's that, I don't think you're that far off. I just think or it needs to be rethought, you know, depending on what your story is.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a it's kind of a big note or a really little note kind of a situation. Can I ask you a quick question? Just something that I grabbed my attention. You have him walking through the flat, through the council estate area, and then to the mini market. Why?
Okay, partly it's to do with symbolism, so it's partly also to the theme about being a prisoner of his. Symbolically, it's about prison. So that's why I described the grilled window in his kitchen, to the idea that when he goes through the council estate, it looks like he might be in a prison exercise yard, and there's groups of people doing. So that was for thematic reasons, also because it's to contrast with the home that he goes to is very expensive. So it's a Victorian mansion, and it's for people that used to be actors or architects or judges or something. And so it's to try and get in this very distinct contrast between the life that he was living that he goes to.
Okay, so so now that you describe it, I understand, and I like that idea. It doesn't really come across that way, though. I would say if you have that kind of an idea, you can even actually specifically write that, where it's like as he strolls steadily through the open space, which looks uncannily like a prison, or you'll find a better way to word that, but you know what I mean, where you draw that.
I was wary of overdoing that. I didn't want to hammer it home, this idea of prison, but it's all the way through the story. There's references like to keys and to uniforms, and so the kind of things that happen in the retirement home are the kind of things that you might have in a prison.
So when you're making the film, a lot of these things are going to be done through direction and done through the wardrobe or the plotting or the pacing or whatever, and so you can get away with being much more subtle about it. The problem is, if you don't call attention to it in the script, at least hint at it, then it looks just like random information, right? If you, let's say you, instead of going to him sitting in front of the TV. What if you go to him walking through the estates, the council estate, and it kind of looks like a prison. We don't know at first if now he's in prison. He's an old guy walking through. Is he in prison? Oh no, it's just the council estate. So it's like you get the same. I'm not saying that you want to do this, but the point is that you want to try to kill those two birds with one stone, right? So otherwise, it feels like you're giving us stray information. Now, you obviously are connected to it, so you know what those themes are. You know what those details are, what those issues are. You know all the parallels throughout the whole script, but the reader doesn't know that. So you're going to need to tease that a little bit, or drop some of that in there.
It was also, I wanted that very visual idea of when he's doing the hit, that he finishes with bringing a bottle to his mouth, and then it jumps to bringing the glass to his mouth, and to show that he's living in something that looks dirty, and to really show what his life's like. And also the mini market. There's an important scene in the mini market a few pages later, which is why the mini market's mentioned where it is.
Okay. So here's what I'm going to tell you, and I don't want you to take it personally, because everyone does it, and this is a note to everyone watching, not just you. You're the writer. I'm 100% sure you can rationalize every choice you've made, right? I'm sure that you have a reason and a purpose for all those little details. The question really, though, is that the most effective way to do it?
Yeah.
Or is there a more effective way to do it? And so I see what you're saying. I hear you. I get the visual. I understand. But because this is so random at this point, at such an early point in the script where I'm trying to figure out what's going on, there's these details that, why do I need to know this? Why do I need to care? That the balance of that is the tricky part of screenwriting, is figuring out, well, is it more effective to go that way, or is it more effective to have that matching shot of whiskey?
Yeah.
I would argue, just in discussing it with you here, it's going to be more impactful to a new reader if he looks like he's walking through a prison. Oh no, it's not a prison. It's the basically government housing project, right? And it's not just the government housing project. This guy is like, he's living in tattered old, and there's that shot of whiskey that he loves so much. Do you know what I mean? Like we always want to be thinking about how are we going to make the reader go, tell me more about this guy. Tell me more about the situation. What happens next?
I was thinking of the transition from scene to
scene. The transition between the two scenes. Yeah. But I would argue, based on what I've read here, that you're a creative enough writer that you can find a transition between those other two scenes too.
Okay.
How's that for a little bit of a challenge?
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm just saying that these are the kinds of things that you want to be thinking about, because this is the kind of perspective that the reader's going to be looking at your work with, right? Does that make sense? It's really hard for me because there's 1,000 different possible options. Like, there's literally an infinite array of possibilities, and for every choice that you make that you can justify and rationalize, there's 10 other choices that are potentially equally as good. Some may even be better. So it's understanding what you're trying to say, but it's also understanding what the reader is getting from it, and how you want the reader to feel at every point through the whole process. So that's kind of the challenge and the balance along the way.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there anything specific in the McVeigh stuff? I don't think so. I mean, all of this is clear. I really like the writing style. I like the clean writing style. The dialogue is this dialogue is something that I've been trying to explain along the way. The dialogue is crisp, and it's interacting with the world around it, right? Do you mind? He lets some fresh air in. It's like, I like that it's not just sort of talky dialogue. I'm not sure if you've been here on the earlier sessions, but that's not always the case, and so it's a nice example. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with that seen really at all. I think that's decent. So I mean, it really boils down to, at the end of the day, it boils down to what's going to hook the person at the beginning, and it all depends on what kind of story you're trying to tell. And
Mhm.
I think if we get rid of the crime drama thing, like don't call it that, um, there might be a better genre distinction for it based on what the actual story is that you're telling. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there might be even better than like character drama, because that's kind of a generic, uninteresting genre sounding name too. So, um, but yeah, if there was something within here that was something a little bit
Yeah.
more, I think we're there. So anyway,
Yeah,
solid.
there's a lot of action as the story goes on. So at Act 3, there's a lot of activity. So I didn't even feel like it was a drama. You know, when he's faced with what to do, and there's just a lot going on. It just didn't feel like a character drama at that point.
Right. Well, okay. So, but then if that's the case, then it sounds to me like you might have pacing issues. If the first act is sort of this slow build to get us to the the home, and then that second act is the home, and he meets the characters and he gets to know the character, and then there's this big sort of actiony bit at the end. It might feel a little uh, like you've taken a turn into a different genre at the end. I'm just, my instinct based on what you just said. Would that be? How do you feel about what I just said?
Um, no, I didn't feel that. There was kind of what there's also there's a lot of activity in the first act, so I wanted the first and the last to be kind of mirrors of each other, but the second act to feel very different because everything's at the retirement home in the second act, and because the third act is the end of the film, things tied up. So can he kill the guy, and what's happening with all their characters involved? So there's just a lot more pace at the end. I don't feel necessarily that it changes
Okay.
genre hugely, but it feels a bit more like a thriller towards the end, just
But so if you
because
were
of what's happening in the storyline.
But so if you were to present it as a thriller, I don't know that this is the opening of a thriller though either.
Exactly,
Right. So,
it doesn't arrive at the
but
start.
so that's one of the challenges that writers face when we try to do things like mix genres, right? Is that the whole way through
Yeah,
we're expecting one thing and then it turns to this other thing. It can be, if you imagine this. So did you ever see the movie From Dusk Till Dawn, with like a Tarantino film with the vampires? I don't know if
yeah,
anybody's ever seen that movie, but it's
yeah,
the movie starts out with this really gritty crime drama thing, and I was like, what is this? This is great. And then all of a sudden it turns into this almost campy vampire thing, and it was like, yeah, but I wanted that other movie, right? Like that's the problem that's the challenge you run into if you switch like that, because it's like, if I'm going to buy into these initial pages and you sort of take me in this direction and then all of a sudden it turns into something else, like, well, you promised me this thing and now you're delivering that. And even if that's good, even if that's interesting, that's not what you put me in the mood for. Right. So that's all I'm saying. And I don't even know if this is applicable to your project, obviously, but something to
yeah. I know what you're saying. I don't think it's quite applicable to mine. I mean, still the storyline is about whether he's going to do this hit and all the way through. So it's just a consequence of this story building up that he's got to kill this guy when he comes to the retirement home, and so you know that this moment's going to happen.
right. Okay, so I mean, the thing is, without knowing where that goes, it's a little, unfortunately, it's a little beyond the scope of what we can cover with the first 3 pages. But those kinds of things are things to think about, and those kinds of things are where
Yeah,
to look for how to improve these first pages. That's, I guess, the
yeah,
takeaway point that I'm getting at.
yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, cool. Well, thanks for sharing your pages. Do you have any other questions or thoughts you wanted to share?
The only, well, one thing, just because you've gone at the moment, is it was important to me that there was ABBA's Waterloo was playing, but I think a producer would see that and think that's going to cost a fortune, that's got to go. For me.
That was my first thought, was ABBA's Waterloo. Why are you throwing that in there? Why is it important? Because of the era, setting up the time period?
Well, it's part of the time part. I mean, I don't know how well that expression is, but in the UK, there's this expression, meeting your Waterloo, which is what the song. Do you know that expression?
I'm not familiar with it, but that doesn't.
That's the part of the problem. It's about Napoleon won battles, but at Waterloo he lost. And so your Waterloo is the thing that finally defeats you. So this guy's been listening to Waterloo and his demise. And also there's a train station in London called Waterloo, and one of the last scenes in the film, in the script, happens at Waterloo Station, so it mirrors the beginning and the end.
Well, so if you have it, if it's that tied into what you're trying to achieve, then I would say you can go ahead and leave that in your script. Just as a general rule, we don't want to do it for the reasons that you've said, because the producer looks at it and goes, I got to get the rights to that music. But if I can see it come back up later on, I'm going to reconnect with that, or I'm going to see the second layer of meaning in it, or what have you. Even just as a script thing, it's probably okay, because I'll see those things in it, right? We go, okay, I see what he's doing. I see the connection. We're gonna have to change that because we're not gonna get the rights to that thing, but I can see what he's going for, and we'll find a creative way around it. I guess from my vantage point when reading that stuff would be, why don't you find the creative way around it, right? But that said, sometimes you just that's the creative choice you want to write, you want to capture and put out there. So I don't have a problem with that. So it's all good. Cool. All right. Well, if that's anything else you wanted to say or ask before we head off?
No, not very much. It's been very, very helpful.
Good stuff. Well, thanks so much for staying up late. It's really late in Switzerland. I appreciate you staying up, and thanks so much for sharing your pages with us.
No, thank you, Jeff.
All right, so there's some pages from Philip, who I think has got sort of a solid, obviously a solid writing style. Obviously, it's an interesting thing. Hopefully, in discussing his pages and seeing sort of how a well-written page from a purely writing standpoint goes, obviously there's sort of like a hierarchy that readers are going to think about and look at as they're reviewing projects, and that hierarchy is going to be like, is the story solid? Is the story is the story well written? If the story is well written, we're going to assume that there's something there. We're going to keep going with it. If I have to focus on things like the image order or the cleanness of the writing style or the technical mistakes that are made, obviously we can't get into the story stuff, which is where the real magic of the feedback and where the real help becomes for you, because there are so many layers of complexity to screenwriting. So many writers out there, new writers particularly, they imagine that there's, I can just go out and buy some script formatting software and start banging out my script and send it out in the world, and really not have a full appreciation for the complexity involved, right? The challenge of tying in the beginning scenes to the end scenes, or adding those additional layers, or the subtext, or even, Philip had, the idea of the Waterloo thing and the sort of layers of meaning that it has and how it ties back into the story. That's going to be the mark of a good writer. That's going to be the mark of someone who a reader's going to want to read, and a producer's going to want to get to know. The challenge is, even once we hit that sort of level, then we have the whole complexity of story, and are we making the most effective choices for the story, and are we preparing the reader for what's to come? And at the end of the day, the readers are always trying to figure out where this is going, and why do I care, and what's going to happen next. And so If we're not, if we're setting them up to go in a different direction, you can tell the greatest story in the world and you could be a great writer. But if the reader was wanting one thing from your setup and then delivered something else, if nothing else, they know going into it, we're going to have to work on this thing. We know going into it, there's money that has to be spent on developing this thing or redeveloping this thing. Now, this one may be closer to something that's actually viable, but if there's still money and time and energy and whatever in redeveloping that thing, then it's easier to say no to it, right? Unless the producer goes, okay, this is not right, but I know exactly how to fix it, which is kind of rarely the case. So hopefully that makes sense. What I might do is go ahead and read the 3 pages from the other script that I was going to read today, which is the first 3 pages from the script MEMENTO. MEMENTO is a film from 1999, I believe, directed by Christopher Nolan, sort of his breakout hit, starring Guy Pearce. The idea behind it is a movie told in reverse. So the idea behind it is we start at the end and work our way back to the beginning. And obviously, as a writer, you would have to know how doing that goes from beginning to end from a story standpoint. It's some interesting pages. And I think it's an interesting read. So let me switch on over to that, and we'll have a good look at that. And I see Saratha just asked a question. I will answer your question when we get back from reading the pages from MEMENTO. Fade in. Interior derelict house, day. A Polaroid photograph clasped between finger and thumb. A crude crime scene flash picture of a man's body lying on a decaying wooden floor, a bloody mess where his head should be. The image in the photo starts to fade as we super titles. The hand holding the photo suddenly fans it in a rapid flapping motion, then holds it still. The image fades more, and again the picture is fanned. As titles end, the image fades to nothing. The hand holding the photo flaps it again, then places it at the front of a Polaroid camera. The camera sucks the blank picture up, then the flash bursts. The Polaroid camera is lowered, revealing the sweaty, heavy-breathing face of Leonard, mid-30s. There are droplets of blood across his face. Leonard stares, satisfied, at something on the ground in front of him. There is wet blood on his blue shirt and beige suit. His hand opens and catches a handgun, which leaps up into his grasp. Still staring, he crouches down and pulls a body off the floor by the wet hair of its bloody head. He slowly inserts the barrel of the gun into the bloody mess where the mouth should be. Leonard flinches, a deafening roar as wet red leaps off his face and suit and head. With a spasm, reassembles itself into the face of Teddy, 40s, mustache. And we cut to interior motel room, 21, day, black and white sequence, close on Leonard's eyes. He rolls them to one side, then turns his head. Leonard voiceover. So where are you? Leonard lifts his head. He is lying on a queen-size bed. Leonard continued. You're in some motel room. Cut to exterior derelict building, day. A late model Jaguar bumps across some railroad tracks and approaches a large, clearly abandoned derelict building. Leonard is driving. He wears a beige suit and blue shirt, no blood. Next to him is Teddy. Leonard stops the car next to a pickup truck sitting outside the derelict building. Leonard kills the engine, staring at the pickup. Leonard, looks like somebody's home. Teddy looks from Leonard to the pickup and back. Teddy, that thing's been there for years. Leonard gets out of the Jaguar and moves to the pickup. He inspects it with a methodical, practiced eye. Teddy follows. Leonard, I think you're wrong. These tracks aren't more than a few days old. Leonard opens the door of the pickup and searches the interior. On the dirty vinyl of the passenger seat, he finds 6 bullets. Leonard picks 2 of them up and studies them. He drops them onto the dashboard, then shuts the door. Leonard continued. Let's take a look inside. Leonard walks toward the house, patting his jacket pockets. Teddy leans on the pickup, uneasy, watching Leonard. Interior derelict building, day. Leonard stands in the dimly lit, decaying former hallway. He pulls a stack of Polaroid photographs out of his pocket and leafs through them as Teddy starts walking towards him. Leonard finds a photo showing Teddy with a shit-eating grin standing in front of the pickup truck. On the broad white strip beneath the photo is handwritten Teddy Gamble, Telephone 5550134. Teddy flips the photo over. On the white strip on the back, in the same small handwriting, don't listen to his lies. He is the one. Kill him. Leonard, voiceover. I finally found him. How long have I been looking? Leonard stuffs the Polaroids back into his pocket, reaches around to the back of his waistband, and draws a handgun, keeping it out of Teddy's line of sight. Teddy enters, weary. Teddy, find anything? Didn't think so. Let's go, yeah? Leonard neither replies nor turns around. Teddy, worried, affects a casual air, shrugging dismissively. Teddy, fuck this. Teddy turns and heads for the door. Leonard leaps on him, pistol whipping him furiously as he shouts, Leonard, you pay for what you did. You beg forgiveness, then you pay. Teddy is down. Leonard drags him back deeper into the dark house. Leonard is in a frenzy. He dumps Teddy at the end of the hall and stands over him. Teddy spits blood. Teddy, you don't have a clue, you freak. Leonard crouches down and grabs Teddy by the lapels. Beg my forgiveness. Beg my wife's forgiveness before I blow your brains out. Teddy, Leonard, you don't have a clue what's going on. You don't even know my name. Leonard, triumphant smile. Teddy, you read it off your fucking photo. You don't know me. You don't even know who you are. Whew. I think that's pretty solid. So this one obviously is fascinating in that we are, the movie itself is telling the story in reverse. And so in order to show, how do you show that? Because you have to show the action of the scenes in forward motion, but they do this really brilliantly at the very beginning. Fade in, that you see a Polaroid photographed, you see it as a bloody mess, and as it starts to fade, the hand is flapping it. So we're literally seeing a Polaroid photo that was taken and fanned and turned into a picture, but we're seeing that in reverse. So the camera sucks the blank picture up, the flash bursts, right? So, and then we're seeing once we have that image of the sort of reverse of a Polaroid picture going back into the camera, right? Then we see the scene itself, which there's blood and there's, drops of blood and such. And and all of this is the reverse image of him shooting Teddy in the head, right? So it goes backwards from that moment of the picture to that moment right before he shoots him, which is a really fascinating sort of, we're running this actually in reverse. And so the start of our film is really setting us up for the reverse nature of this story. Then we go to this voiceover bit where he's confused and he wakes up, he doesn't know who he is. And then we go back to this building. We see the scene right before the scene at the very beginning. And so he's inspecting and he's looking around and he's finding clues, but he doesn't know what the clues are, what the clues mean. We're going to find this out later because he has a sort of amnesia situation. And Teddy, we don't know who this guy is, but he's obviously seeing something different to what Leonard's seeing. And so there's some sort of miscommunication going on here. And then we go through, we see how this transpired. Don't listen to his lies, kill him. This is what's going to lead to that opening scene. But as we do, Teddy's basically saying, you don't know what's going on. You don't understand. You don't understand here because he's telling him, you don't know what you think you know because you can't remember anything. We're going to discover this later in the story, but this is a really fascinating way to pull us into a really unusual story structure and story layout. And so if you haven't read the script, I encourage you to go read it. If you haven't seen the film, it's absolutely fascinating, and it's a really interesting film. I think they did a really great job. It's quite amazing, and there's a reason why it sort of stands up. So from a writing standpoint, when you think about also the beginning page here and how this is, I always talk about how there's this huge giant block of text, and it's not so enticing for a reader. But if you look at the page itself, this first page, if you were a skimming reader and you sort of look at this, what's going to jump out at you? Bloody mess, fanned Polaroid camera, wet blood, bloody head, Teddy. So where are you? You're in some motel room. So this is, if nothing else, at the bottom of this first page, we see a guy waking up saying, where am I? Right? So whatever just happened probably precipitated this on the skim, the reader's first glimpse of this. So understand that you can have a big chunky block of text like this, but we want to be able to sort of quickly determine what this is going to be. That we don't want to leave the skimmer or the scanner of your script not having at least some hint of what's going on here before they move on to the next page. Does that make sense? So do you guys have any specific questions about maybe Memento or any other questions about Philip's pages earlier? Saratha says, should we indicate about the inciting incident during the first 3 pages? So Saratha, I'm not sure what you mean by that question. So for those who don't know, the inciting incident is the event in your story that sets your whole story in motion. That doesn't have to be on page 1. That doesn't have to be on page 3. That doesn't have to be on page 10. The sort of formulaic approach, the standard 3-act structure is going to have it round about page 10. The idea being that you spend the first sort of 10 pages establishing the world the character lives in. And then something happens that sets the story in motion. That's not going to happen in all situations. Sometimes your inciting incident can happen off camera before the story even starts. Sometimes it can happen 30 pages into it because we really want to take time and get to know all the different nuances of whatever the current world is before that event that sets the story in motion. So you're not indicating the inciting incident. The inciting incident is just something that happens in your story. So we're never going to call attention to it. Anyone who out there's so many people teach screenwriting, in my opinion, the wrong way. They act like there's certain things that need to happen on certain pages. And from the reader's perspective, from the perspective of someone who looks through tens, hundreds, thousands of projects, I can tell you that once you spot the predictable pattern of a formula, you know where the story's going, and you know where the story's going. Today's audiences are much more sophisticated. There's much more nuance. We don't have to tell the formulaic stories in order to grab and command the attention and hold the interest of an audience. So people who try to tell you that you need to shoehorn every idea into some rigid formula don't really understand the why behind storytelling. Why are we telling stories? We're telling stories to make a point, or to say something, or to convey a theme, or to explore an idea, or explore characters, or whatever it might be. At the end of the day, if you don't, if the exploration of that or the ideas that you're looking at or presenting or pursuing don't fit into that rigid formula, that doesn't make the idea wrong. That might make the formula not the appropriate story structure for your particular idea or the theme that you're trying to explore. So, so in general, I would say, don't worry about the page number or the page count. The key is this. The reader needs to know early on, what are we watching? What am I looking at, and why do I care? And the way we generally do that in a story is we generally show a character in their current environment when something happens to throw them out of that environment or out of that otherwise normal trajectory in their life, right? So that's the inciting incident that sets us on this path of the story. We're trying to find out what that is. We're trying to figure out, who is it? What's the story we're on? Why do I care? What's it mean? Right? So it's not about what happens where in your story. It's about hooking us, pulling us in, and exploring what you're trying to explore in the way that's most suitable for the story you're trying to tell. He says, I understand that we would want to exhibit the need of our main character during the first few minutes. Maybe you don't always need to show the need of your character in the first few minutes of the story. You don't always have to. That may not be the most effective way. So imagine, for example, some sort of crime story or something. What will often happen is you'll see this big elaborate chase scene or this big crime or some 5-8 minute extended action sequence at first, because that's going to be visually interesting. It's going to set up the heist. It's going to set up whatever it is. We don't even meet the character until 8-10 pages in. So you can't we can't necessarily set up our character's need there. It's going to be what's the genre, what's going to be pulling us into the story, what's going to be what is it that we're telling a story, we're entertaining an audience, we're engaging them through the art of story. So it's not about character need or inciting incident or all these like buzzwords, these jargony screenwriter storyteller words. It's about entertaining the audience in the most effective way possible. Those jargony buzzwords are tools and devices and ideas to help you, but ultimately it's about finding that's going to be most right and suitable to your story. Says, I think that inciting incident is what happens to our guy where he is about to go out of his comfort zone and that his world won't be the same anymore. So the inciting incident is not about his comfort zone. The inciting incident is the thing that sets the story in motion. So imagine if you had, so today I'm a little bit sick, right? No, so let's say last week I was not sick, and so I'm going about my day, and I had this whole plan to do whatever I'm going to do, and then today I wake up and I discover I'm sick. Well, that could be the inciting incident for, well, I'm going to go get some medicine at the store, and as I go to get medicine at the store, something happens. I bump into somebody, or I get inadvertently involved in some domestic terrorism situation. I don't know what it could be, right? But the story happened because of that inciting incident, that thing that changed my normal trajectory. So it's not about being out of my comfort zone. It's about the thing that sets the story in motion. Without that thing, you would never have the story, right? Lame example, by the way. So don't make it somebody gets sick and goes to get medicine. So the follow-up then is Sarath saying, if you want to show a fish out of water, you have to show what his water looks like at the beginning. And that's kind of a decent metaphor for it. It's not always the case, though. The inciting incident is just the incident that incites the story. That's all there is to it. There's nothing more. If not for this incident, this story would not have happened. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the characters going to some completely foreign world to him. It could just be that it could just be that it's just different to what his world would otherwise have been, and it's something out of his control, something that he didn't choose. That's basically what that is. Patrick says, would a cover of the ABBA song be okay? Would that work? In your script, you're not going to talk about a cover of the ABBA song. You're going to just say the ABBA song, or you're not going to say the ABBA song. Generally, you would want to indicate the type of music. Some 70s pop music blares from the window is probably going to be, more, that's more producer friendly. That said, the way Philip used Waterloo and the additional layers of meaning that he said he ascribes to it, and how we're going to sort of see links back to it later on, I would say you can go ahead and use that in your script. There's a general rule not to do it, but every general rule there can be exceptions to that general rule. It's all about the balance, right? So if throughout your script I see 3-4 pop songs that are going to be mega expensive to license, and for whatever reason you've incorporated them all into your story, then I'm going to be like, well, this might be a little outside our reach. Is it even? The producer's going to start questioning, is this good enough to go through that difficulty and that complexity? You as the writer want to make the job easy on the people who are reading your project, right? So that's more the reason why not to include it than because there's some rule that says you shouldn't, or just because it's going to cost money to license it. We're going to probably change that piece of music anyway, like depending on the licensing. Who knows? But then maybe we talk to somebody and they're best friends with the manager of the band, and they're like, yeah, what the heck? I like the movie that you're trying to go ahead and use it. I mean, that happens too. So, we can't rule it out, but the point to writers is to understand the general rule of thumb, understand why it is a rule of thumb. There are no rules. It's not hard and fast. You don't have to abide by some set of arbitrary, industry that must be done this way. There's a reason why it's generally done this way. And if you understand that, then that's going to help you know when and when not to break the rule. But if you don't know the rule, then you're going to break the rule, and it's going to be clear that you don't know the rules. So know the rules before you break them. Srutha says, have you ever read first few pages of full description without any dialogue? I'm thinking about doing it for my screenplay. I have. I don't like it. I would argue that you want to break it up somehow. You can do it. I would just creatively lay it out on the page so there's some white space here and there. It's not one big block of text is gonna, or it's repellent to the reader. We want something that looks like it's going to be an engaging read, a fun read. I'm going to want to immerse into it. So often people are reading your script because they have to, not because they want to. And if you make it hard for them through your writing style or through the layout on the page or through just making it really hard for me to understand what's going on, then you're taking somebody who has to read your project because they've been assigned it or because it's stacking up on their desk and they have to get an answer out or whatever it might be. You're taking them from, all right, what's this one about, to, oh, geez, no. You're giving them more of a reason to say it's all too hard. There are too many other possibilities out there. So there's no set rule. You can see in the Memento script that almost the full first page is just text. So obviously it can be done. But the key is to make sure there are layers in there and to make sure it's an engaging read throughout. The very first paragraph, I'll read it to you again. A Polaroid photograph clasped between finger and thumb, a crude crime scene flash picture of a man's body lying on a decaying wooden floor, a bloody mess where his head should be. Bang, right away. This is somebody who's got a descriptive writing style. This is a picture. I see that in my imagination very clearly. Now I'm going to give this person the benefit of the doubt and read the next sentence. Do you know what I mean? Oh, the next sentence is showing me something I've never seen before. An image that's fading rather than an image that's coming into focus as a Polaroid, right? So it's all about step-by-step pulling the reader into your story and through your screenplay. All right, guys. Well, we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for joining me on this feedback loop session. Please, if you haven't, let me give you the registration link for next week. Here we go. If you're on this session, go ahead and click that link. Join us in next week's session. If you're watching a video replay of this at some point down the road, go to thefeedbackloop.co and register for next Tuesday's session. We're going to try to do this every Tuesday. If you have pages to submit, thefeedbackloop.co/submit. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, guys. And thanks again to Philip for being brave and